Divorce wasn't the worst. Halloween nightmare at the cabin. Donna stood frozen in the cabin's dark kitchen, gripping a fireplace poker so tight her knuckles turned white. Her breath came out shaky, her wide eyes locked on the doorway. A figure stood there, tall, impossibly tall, its head brushing the wooden beam, its face nothing but darkness. The only light came from the flickering fire in the next room, throwing shadows across the muddy footprints leading straight to where she stood. The fog outside pressed hard against the windows like it wanted to come in. 42, exhausted, and still wearing the same jeans and flannel she had on when she left the city that morning, Donna could barely think. Minutes ago, she was just a divorced nurse hoping for peace in her rented cabin in the Catskills. Now, something she couldn't explain had stepped inside. Her mind screamed to run, but her legs wouldn't move. The faceless shape tilted its head, as if studying her. Donna thought her divorce was the worst pain she'd ever feel, until Halloween night proved that some nightmares make a broken marriage look like a blessing. What could make a woman find courage in her darkest moment of terror? Tell us where you're watching from in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel because tomorrow we're dropping another story you won't want to miss. Your support helps us bring you more powerful stories like this one. Let's get started. Donna used to think her life had structure, marriage, career, a future she could count on. But after 17 years, her marriage collapsed like a weak bridge under too much weight. Now, at 42, she lived in a one-bedroom apartment just a few blocks from Albany Medical Center, surrounded by boxes she still hadn't unpacked 6 months later. Most nights, she came home after double shifts at the hospital, dropped her bag, and sat in silence. The walls were thin, the radiator hissed like it resented her, and the neighbor's television was her only company. The divorce had taken more than money. It had scraped her sense of self raw. The court hearings, the lawyer fees, the endless paperwork, each one had chipped away at the woman she used to be. She was good at caring for others, but she had forgotten how to care for herself. When she looked in the mirror, she saw tired eyes that belonged to someone older, someone who'd lost her spark somewhere between compromise and heartbreak. Her sister, Paula, called often, always trying to pull her out of her shell. One rainy Thursday, Paula's voice came through the phone, bright and certain. "Take the cabin for the weekend," she said. "It's quiet, peaceful. You need a reset." Donna hesitated. The cabin near Phoenicia sat on 12 acres of dense woodland, right by Esopus Creek. Paula and her husband rarely used it, calling it their escape from noise. But to Donna, isolation sounded like the wrong kind of silence, too much space for thoughts that already echoed too loudly in her head. Still, the offer lingered. The city was beginning to feel like a cage. Every corner of her apartment reminded her of the life that used to fill it. Sunday breakfasts with her ex-husband, laughter that once came easy. Maybe solitude would help her breathe again. Maybe it would help her remember who she was before everything fell apart. By the time October 30th arrived, she had made up her mind. She packed light: jeans, sweaters, her nursing journal, and an old thermos for coffee. She tossed them into the trunk of her aging Honda Civic and left before dawn. The drive south on Route 28 was like traveling through a changing world. Albany's gray streets slowly gave way to open stretches of forest and rolling hills. The further she went, the more the city's weight lifted. By the time she reached Shandaken, the road curved between trees glowing with fall colors, flames of orange, crimson, and gold. She rolled down the window and let the cool air fill her lungs. For the first time in months, she felt something close to calm. Past Big Indian, the road narrowed, cutting through dense woods. She saw the weathered mailbox, its paint flaking, the name Paula M. barely legible, and turned onto the dirt road that led to the cabin. The path was framed by tall maples and oaks, their branches forming a tunnel of color. Leaves drifted down, collecting in the ruts made by old tires. When the cabin came into view, Donna slowed the car. It stood 2 stories high, built from dark timber and stone, with a long covered porch that wrapped around the front. The roof sagged slightly in the middle, but the structure had a kind of quiet dignity. Smoke still stained the stone chimney from the last time someone had used it. She stepped out, the gravel crunching under her boots, and felt the cold mountain air bite at her cheeks. For a moment, she just stood there, taking it in. The forest surrounded her completely. No sound of cars, no distant voices, just wind and the faint rush of water from the creek beyond the trees. Her first thought was how still it all felt. Peaceful, yes, but in a way that made her aware of how small she was in the middle of it. A thin layer of fog clung to the edge of the woods, low and white, like breath waiting to move. She pushed the thought away. She was here to rest, not to overthink. Carrying her bags inside, she found the cabin exactly as Paula described, rustic but functional. The air smelled faintly of cedar and dust. A stone fireplace dominated the main room, flanked by worn leather chairs and shelves filled with old books. The kitchen was small, with a wooden table and mismatched chairs. Upstairs, 2 bedrooms and a bathroom with an antique clawfoot tub waited, untouched for months. By late afternoon, she had unpacked and lit a small fire. She made tea, sat on the porch, and watched the light shift through the trees. For the first time in a long while, there was no schedule, no hospital call, no one asking for anything. As dusk began to settle, she caught herself staring at the tree line. The woods looked endless, layered in shadows that deepened as the sun fell. A faint rustle moved through the leaves, like something shifting out of sight. It was probably a deer, she told herself, or wind moving through dry branches. Still, her pulse quickened before she forced herself to look away. She locked the door when she went to bed that night, the sound of the bolt sliding into place louder than she expected. The silence that followed was heavy, but she managed to sleep for the first time in days. She had no idea this weekend would redefine what fear meant. By late afternoon, the cabin had started to feel like hers, at least for the weekend. Donna spent the first few hours sweeping the dusty floors and opening every window she could find to let in fresh air. The scent of pine drifted through the rooms as she moved from space to space, cleaning and taking quiet note of her surroundings. The living room held a large stone fireplace, blackened by years of use. A few logs sat neatly stacked beside it, dry and ready to burn. The walls were lined with faded photographs in sepia tones, stern men and women from another time, their expressions as cold as the glass that covered them. She didn't recognize any of them but assumed they were relatives of the cabin's original owners. They watched her from their frames as though guarding a history no one spoke about anymore. In the kitchen, the sink had a hand pump instead of running water. The old wood counters bore deep knife marks and stains that told of years of family meals. Upstairs, she found 2 bedrooms, one small, one larger, and a narrow bathroom with a clawfoot tub and a small mirror clouded by age. The place wasn't luxurious, but it had character, and it felt honest in a way her apartment never did. When she finished unpacking, the sun was sinking behind the trees. The light filtering through the window turned golden, soft, and quiet. She lit the fireplace, the crackle of dry wood filling the silence. She cooked a simple dinner, pasta, a jar of sauce, and a small glass of wine, and ate by the fire while the wind brushed gently against the windows. For the first time in a long while, the silence didn't feel lonely. It was deep and clean, like a kind of peace she hadn't realized she'd been craving. No hospital intercoms, no car horns, no phone calls, just stillness. She leaned back in the old armchair with her wine and let the sound of the fire soothe her. It must have been close to 10 when she first heard it, a soft scratching along the outside wall. Slow, light, and almost curious. She froze, listening. The sound stopped. A moment later, it started again, higher up, closer to the window. Her first thought was a branch rubbing against the siding. The woods surrounded the cabin, and the wind had picked up since sunset. She took another sip of wine and told herself not to overreact. But then the scratching moved, deliberately, from one window to the next. Pausing, continuing, circling. She set her glass down and stood, her heart beginning to race. Maybe a raccoon, she thought. Or a stray dog. Her mind offered every explanation it could find. Yet something about the sound felt too steady, too intentional. When the scratching stopped, the silence that followed was heavier than before. Donna strained to listen, afraid even to breathe. That's when she heard the footsteps. They started on the porch. Slow, heavy steps that creaked across the old boards. One pass. Then another. Back and forth. Back and forth. Each footfall landed with a weight that didn't belong to a small animal. Her stomach dropped. Paula had told her the closest neighbor lived nearly 3 miles away, across the creek. There was no reason anyone should be out here this late, especially in the dark. The footsteps stopped right at the front door. For a moment, she thought whoever, or whatever, it was had gone. Then the doorknob began to turn. It twisted gently at first, then rattled hard, the old metal clanking against the frame. The sound tore through the silence, sharp and violent. Donna stumbled back, her breath catching. She grabbed the fireplace poker, its iron handle cold against her palm, and held it out in front of her. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears. The knob jerked again, harder this time, as if someone outside was trying to force it open. "Who's there?" she shouted, her voice trembling more than she wanted it to. No answer. Just the rattling of the knob, metal grinding on metal. She backed toward the fireplace, gripping the poker with both hands, her eyes locked on the door. Then, as suddenly as it began, the noise stopped. For several seconds, she heard nothing. No wind. No footsteps. Nothing. Then came the faint crunch of gravel, slow and fading, like someone walking away into the woods. Donna stood frozen, her muscles tight, waiting for it to return. When it didn't, she forced herself to move. She checked the door, it was still locked, and peered through the side window. The porch was empty, the fog outside glowing faintly in the moonlight. Every part of her wanted to run to the car and leave, but she couldn't make herself step outside. Instead, she dragged the armchair close to the fireplace, poker still in hand, and sat through the night. The fire burned low as the hours passed. Each small creak of the cabin made her jump. She told herself she was overreacting, that stress was making her see danger where there was none. Still, she didn't close her eyes once. When daylight finally crept through the windows, it brought with it a fragile sense of safety. The woods outside looked calm and harmless, the porch empty except for fallen leaves. Donna checked every corner of the cabin again. Nothing broken, nothing missing, not even a footprint near the door. By mid-morning, she started to question whether it had happened at all. Maybe she had been so tired her mind had played tricks on her. Still, when she found the wineglass on the table, the mark of her untouched second sip was proof she hadn't dreamed the fear. Something had been out there. By afternoon, her hand stopped shaking. She told herself she'd stay one more night. She wasn't going to be chased away by her own nerves. The cabin was supposed to help her heal, and she refused to let a few noises send her running. She stood on the porch, staring out at the woods, listening to the sound of the creek in the distance. In daylight, everything looked normal. Beautiful. Even. But somewhere deep down, she felt the quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It was waiting. Daylight brought rationality, but nightfall would bring truth. By Halloween morning, Donna had convinced herself that the previous night's noises were nothing more than exhaustion playing tricks on her. The sunlight filtering through the curtains looked so normal, so ordinary, that it almost mocked her for being afraid. She decided she needed people, movement, and the comfort of voices. So, she got dressed, brushed her hair into a ponytail, and drove into town for breakfast. Phoenicia sat tucked between the Catskill Mountains like a storybook town that time had forgotten. The main street was lined with small shops, their wooden signs hand-painted and weathered from the years. Pumpkins sat on doorsteps. Corn stalks leaned against lampposts. Orange and black streamers fluttered above the sidewalks. A large banner across Main Street read Halloween Festival Tonight, in cheerful block letters. Children in jackets ran between stores with paper bags, laughing and chasing leaves that swirled in the breeze. Donna parked outside a cafe called Sweet Sue's, drawn by the smell of coffee and something sweet baking inside. A bell chimed softly as she stepped through the door. The place was warm and busy, mismatched chairs, chalkboard menus, and old photos of the town on the walls. Locals filled the tables, chatting about the parade and the cold front expected that evening. A gray-haired woman in her late 60s approached with a notepad and a friendly smile. Her name tag read Beverly. "Morning, sweetheart. You look like you're not from around here," she said, her voice kind and curious. "Just visiting," Donna replied, returning the smile. "Staying out near Esopus Creek. My sister lent me her cabin for the weekend." Beverly's hand paused mid-note. Her smile faltered just slightly. "Would that be the old Patterson place?" Donna blinked, surprised. "Yes, that's what she called it. You know it." The server's eyes softened with something between pity and concern. "Everyone in town knows it. Haven't had anyone stay there in a long while." She leaned a little closer. "If I were you, honey, I'd book a room at the inn instead." Donna laughed lightly, trying to sound casual. "Why's that?" Beverly hesitated, glancing toward the counter as if to check no one was listening. "Because some places hold memories that don't fade. That cabin's one of them." Donna frowned. "You mean it's haunted?" "Haunted's a fancy word for it," Beverly said, pouring coffee into Donna's mug. "But people around here remember what happened there." The curiosity in Donna overpowered her nerves. She leaned forward. "What did happen?" Beverly sighed, set the pot down, and took the seat across from her for a moment. It was Halloween night, 1962. The Henderson family, husband, wife, 2 kids, came up from Connecticut. They rented that cabin for a week's vacation. Seemed like good people. Spent their first day hiking, bought groceries right here in town, waved to everyone. Next morning, a neighbor passing by noticed their car still in the drive. By evening, the sheriff went to check. The car was there. Their suitcases were still inside. Dinner was half-cooked on the stove. But the family was gone. Vanished. No footprints, no signs of struggle. Just gone. Donna felt her stomach tighten. They were never found. "Not a trace," Beverly said quietly. "Search parties combed the woods for weeks. They even drained part of the creek. Nothing. It's still in the county archives if you ever care to read about it." Donna tried to smile. "So people think their ghosts walk the woods now?" Beverly shook her head. "No, dear. That's not the story." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "People say something took them. Something they called the Hollow Man." The name alone made Donna shiver. "What's that supposed to be?" "There are 2 versions," Beverly said, folding her hands. "One says he was a father back in the 1800s. His children died in a cabin fire near those same woods. They say he went mad with grief, wandered the forest until he froze one winter night. When they found him, he had clawed the bark off trees with his bare hands. Locals buried him near the creek. But some claim his spirit never rested, that it searches for what it lost." Donna frowned. "And the other version?" Beverly hesitated. The darker one says he wasn't human to begin with. Folks who've lived here a long time talk about an old figure that appears when the air turns cold and the fog rolls in. Tall, thin, with no face. Just emptiness where one should be. It moves through the woods, knocking on windows, testing doors. Sometimes it stops at a cabin for a while. The air between them felt heavy now. Donna forced out a quiet laugh. "You're really trying to scare me, aren't you?" Beverly didn't smile. "I don't tell these stories for fun, sweetheart. Every few years, someone reports the same thing. Footsteps on their porch, tapping on glass, a shape in the trees. It's not in people's heads. It's been written down, logged by the sheriff's office. I've seen too many folks pack up and leave mid-stay, pale as ghosts themselves." Donna's laugh faded. The previous night's noises replayed in her mind, the deliberate rhythm of the scratching, the heavy steps, the rattling doorknob. She tried to keep her tone light. Maybe it's just an old story that grew over time. Beverly looked at her for a long moment, then placed a hand over Donna's. "I'm trying to keep you safe, hun. Whatever that place is, it doesn't let people rest easy. Don't brush this off." Donna nodded politely, though her pulse had quickened. She finished her pancakes without tasting them, glancing toward the window where children passed in paper masks, laughing in the bright daylight. For a moment, she envied their carefree joy. When she returned to her car, she told herself she didn't believe in legends. Still, her hands trembled slightly as she turned the key in the ignition. The drive back to the cabin felt longer than before. The bright fall colors seemed duller now, the trees closer. Each bend in the road brought her closer to the quiet she wasn't sure she wanted anymore. When she arrived, she didn't go inside right away. She walked around the porch, checking the boards, the windows, the lock on the front door. Nothing seemed disturbed. Still, she fetched more firewood, stacked it near the door, and checked every window latch twice. By the time the sun began to set, her nerves had eased only a little. She poured herself another glass of wine and told herself it was just folklore, stories meant to entertain locals on cold nights. But as she locked the last window and turned off the downstairs light, her hands were still shaking. She told herself it was folklore, but her hands still shook as she locked every window. By the time darkness settled over the mountains, the air had turned heavy and still. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the wind that had whispered through the trees all afternoon had stopped completely. Donna sat near the fireplace with a book open in her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. Every sound, every creak, every pop from the fire, made her heart tighten. The fog came just after 7. It rolled down from the ridges like a moving wall, thick and pale, swallowing the trees and pressing close around the cabin. Within minutes, she couldn't see more than a few feet beyond the porch. It felt alive, shifting and breathing against the glass as if it wanted in. She made her rounds again, checking each door and window. Every latch clicked into place under her trembling fingers. The fire burned high in the hearth, throwing orange light across the room. She brewed tea to steady herself but barely drank it. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. By 8:30, the night outside had grown so dense that the windows reflected only the interior, the glow of the fire, the furniture, her own anxious figure. She checked her watch. 8:47 p.m. Later, she would remember that number for the rest of her life. The first sound came softly, so faint she thought she imagined it. A single knock. Then another. But it wasn't at the door, it was at the windows. All of them. A steady rhythm, knock, 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 moved around the cabin like footsteps circling prey. Donna froze, her book sliding off her lap. The sound continued, left wall, back wall, kitchen window, front room, each tap deliberate, spaced apart, unhurried. She stood in the center of the room, turning slowly, trying to locate it. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice catching. "This is private property. You need to leave." The knocking stopped. For a few heartbeats, there was silence. She almost convinced herself that it had been the wind again, branches brushing the walls. But then came the laughter. It started low, from somewhere outside the front window, a hollow, rasping sound that made her blood run cold. It wasn't a man's voice or a woman's. It was something in between, empty and dry, as though it came from deep within the fog itself. Donna's knees weakened. The laughter rose and fell, echoing through the trees, circling the cabin the same way the knocking had. Her breath came short, uneven. A tall shadow passed across the front window, blotting out the firelight for a second. It was impossibly thin, its head brushing the upper frame. She couldn't see a face, only the faint outline of shoulders and long limbs moving in slow, unnatural strides. Panic flooded her. She stumbled backward, grabbed the poker from the hearth, and ran for the kitchen where the back door was locked tight. But the moment she reached it, she froze. Across the wooden floor were muddy footprints, bare, human footprints, spaced apart like someone had walked from the door straight into the center of the room. The back door was still locked from the inside. The footprints stopped right where she was standing. Her breath came faster. The air around her felt cold enough to sting. The fog pressed harder against the windows, blurring the faint outline of the woods beyond. Then, without warning, every light in the cabin went out. The fire dimmed to embers, leaving only a faint red glow that barely reached the walls. Donna's voice trembled as she whispered into the dark, "Please, stop." From somewhere behind her came the sound of breathing. Slow, heavy, deliberate. It wasn't hers. She turned her head slightly, not daring to move her feet. The sound drew closer, a faint drag of air, the creak of floorboards bending under weight. Her heart pounded so loud she could barely hear anything else. She wanted to run, but her body wouldn't obey. Every instinct screamed to stay still. The breathing came right behind her now, no more than a few feet away. She turned slowly, the poker shaking in her hands. What she saw burned itself into her mind forever. The figure stood between her and the fireplace, backlit by the weak glow of the dying embers. It was taller than any person she'd ever seen, its shoulders thin and sharp beneath rotting clothes that hung in loose strips. The skin, or what passed for skin, looked gray and stretched, like something that had been pulled too tight. But the face, there was nothing there. No eyes, no mouth, no features at all. Just darkness where a face should have been, shifting faintly like smoke inside a hollow shape. One of its arms lifted, long and bone-like, reaching toward her with slow, deliberate movement. Donna's body trembled, her mind split between terror and disbelief. Every thought of her past, every regret, every moment of loss, her failed marriage, her lonely nights, her exhaustion, all of it blurred into one single instinct: survive. The figure took a step forward, the floor creaking beneath its weight. The air around her seemed to pull inward, like the cabin itself was holding its breath. In that moment between terror and surrender, something unexpected awakened in Donna. The fire behind the figure flared brighter, painting its hollow form in trembling light. Donna's breath came in short bursts, the poker still raised though her arms ached from holding it. Fear had filled every part of her body until there was no space left to breathe. But somewhere deep inside, something began to shift. It wasn't bravery at first, just exhaustion. She was tired of running, tired of being afraid of everything that had already broken her once. Months of surviving divorce had already tested every piece of her strength. The sleepless nights, the silence of an empty home, the humiliation of starting over, all of it had carved her into someone harder, someone who refused to stay small. She had stood beside dying patients and given comfort when families couldn't. She had endured heartbreak and kept breathing. What was one more shadow, one more night to face? Her hands lowered a little. The The poker's tip touched the floor. She looked at the shape before her, the long arms, the ragged edges of what once might have been a man, and something inside her stopped screaming. Her voice came out barely above a whisper, trembling but steady enough to be heard. "What do you want?" The room froze around her. The figure's arm, half raised in threat, stopped mid-air. For several seconds, there was no movement, no sound but the soft hiss of wood in the fire. Donna swallowed hard, her voice steadier this time. "What are you looking for?" she asked. "Everyone deserves to find what they've lost. Even you." The air changed. The breathing, once heavy and ragged, shifted to something broken, like the sound of a man trying not to cry. The figure's chest shuddered. A faint sound escaped it, low and uneven, not anger this time but sorrow. Donna felt it before she fully understood it. Beverly's story echoed in her mind. The father who'd gone mad with grief after losing his children to a fire, whose spirit wandered these woods searching for them. Not a monster. Not evil. Just endless suffering, trapped and alone for more than a century. Her tears came without warning, sliding down her face as she stared at the form trembling before her. She whispered, voice cracking, "I'm so sorry you lost them. I'm sorry you've been alone all this time." The figure quivered as though her words had struck something deep within it. The darkness where its face should have been began to ripple like heat over stone. For a brief second, the void shifted, and she saw him. Not a creature, but a man. Weathered, grey-bearded, eyes hollow from years of sorrow yet filled with something unmistakably human. Her chest tightened. Compassion flooded her fear until it drowned everything else. She took a slow step forward, the firelight warming her face. "They're not here," she said softly. "Your children aren't here. They're at peace. They've been waiting for you, but not in this pain." The figure shook its head, the movement small, almost childlike. A broken sound rose from its chest, part moan, part sob. Donna's tears fell faster. She wanted to reach out, to touch his arm, to offer some kind of comfort even if her hand passed through air. "It's all right," she whispered. "You can stop searching. You can rest. Let go of this place. Let go of the pain. They wouldn't want you trapped here." The room filled with a strange stillness, not threatening, not heavy, just waiting. The fire burned steady, throwing sparks that climbed toward the chimney. Donna stood only a few feet from him now, her fear replaced by something deeper than courage, understanding. She thought of her own losses, the marriage she couldn't save, the years she spent trying to prove she was enough, the ache of coming home to silence night after night. For the first time, she saw the thread connecting her pain to his. Different lives, same loneliness. Both searching for what once was. The figure's body began to tremble harder. Its shoulders hunched forward as if the weight of centuries pressed down on them. She could feel the sorrow radiating through the air, centuries of longing, the endless replay of one terrible night. Donna took another step closer, her voice gentle. "You've suffered enough. You don't have to keep reliving it. They've already forgiven you. Maybe it's time you forgive yourself." The breathing slowed. The shape flickered, its edges fading in and out like smoke trying to stay solid. For a second, she thought she heard voices, soft, distant, children's laughter carried faintly through the air. The figure lifted its head, as though hearing them too. Donna's chest tightened again, but this time from empathy, not fear. Her tears fell freely now, not because she was terrified, but because she finally understood the truth of it all. Loss never truly disappears, it transforms. The man's grief had turned him into a shadow of himself, bound to the place of his worst memory. She looked at him through the shimmer of her tears and spoke the words that came from somewhere deeper than reason. "You can go now," she whispered. "You've done enough searching. They're waiting for you, just not here." For a long moment, he didn't move. The fire crackled softly. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Then the figure lowered its arm, as if in surrender. The darkness around it began to waver again, edges softening in the glow. Donna stepped back, wiping her face with the back of her sleeve. She could barely see him now, only a faint shimmer where he had stood. But she knew, with a certainty she couldn't explain, that something had changed. The anger, the cold, the endless grief, it was loosening. She whispered one last time, "You can rest now." The shape tilted its head toward her, almost like a nod. What happened next would stay with Donna forever. The figure didn't move for several seconds after her final words. The only sound in the cabin was the faint hiss of burning logs. Then, slowly, its head tilted upward as if the weight of grief had grown too heavy to bear. The air, once freezing, began to shift. The biting chill that had wrapped itself around her shoulders softened. Warmth seeped back into the room, subtle at first, then growing until it filled every corner. Donna wiped her eyes, her chest still trembling with uneven breaths. The figure remained near the center of the room, motionless, shadow-thin against the orange glow of the fire. It lifted both hands toward where its face should have been. The motion was fragile, deliberate, something achingly human. Not a threat, not anger, but weariness. A silent plea. Donna's tears returned, heavier now. For all the horror of the night, she saw no monster before her. She saw a father, broken by the loss of his children, bound by his own guilt, unable to move beyond one moment in time. She had known her own kind of prison too. Hers had been made of grief, of regret, of the endless replay of words she wished she'd said differently. For the first time in her life, she didn't want to run from fear. She wanted to understand it. Her voice came out soft, quivering like a child's, but filled with compassion. "Go to them," she whispered. "It's okay. You're forgiven. Forgive yourself. Go home." The figure's hands trembled. A sound filled the air, like a gust of wind rushing through the walls though no window or door had opened. The fire roared higher, flames stretching upward as if reacting to her words. The light filled the cabin until it nearly blinded her, but she didn't look away. In that brilliance, the figure began to fade. Not with violence or fear, but with quiet release, like fog melting under morning sunlight. Each flicker of the fire revealed less of him until only a faint outline remained, shimmering as if caught between two worlds. Donna held her breath, afraid to break the fragile peace forming before her. A sound came, a voice, rough and hoarse, but filled with unmistakable gratitude. "Thank you." She gasped. It was faint, almost disbelieving, as though speaking hurt after so many years of silence. But those two words carried centuries of sorrow and relief. The light dimmed. The warmth steadied. When she blinked again, he was gone. The cabin was still. No shadows in the corners. No movement outside. The strange heaviness that had lingered since her arrival had vanished completely. The walls seemed to breathe again, the air lighter, cleaner, free. Outside, through the window, she saw the fog thinning, curling upward toward the treetops. The stars began to appear, one after another, until the crescent moon emerged, bright and pure above the dark ridge of the mountains. For the first time since arriving, the woods looked peaceful. Donna's knees gave way beneath her. She sank into the armchair near the fire, covering her face with trembling hands. Every emotion she had suppressed for years came crashing through: fear, sorrow, relief, compassion. She cried until there were no tears left. When she finally looked up, the fire had burned down to glowing embers. The silence around her was no longer haunting. It was calm. Healing. The night passed without another sound. No footsteps, no scratching, no whispering wind. Just the steady crackle of cooling logs and her slow, steady breathing. She didn't sleep much, but for the first time in months, she wasn't afraid of the dark. By morning, sunlight streamed through the windows, golden and soft. It filled the cabin with warmth so natural it almost felt new. Donna stood in the doorway, looking around. Everything was the same: the fireplace, the worn rug, the old photographs on the wall, but the feeling had changed completely. It wasn't a haunted place anymore. It was just a cabin, quiet, rustic, ordinary. She could finally see it for what it was, not what it had been made to represent. She packed slowly, folding her clothes neatly, cleaning the dishes she'd used, even sweeping the floor one last time. There was a sense of finality in every movement, but not sadness. Just gratitude. Before stepping outside, she turned back for one last look. The cabin sat in a beam of morning light filtering through the oaks. Peaceful. Still. Rest well, she whispered. The drive down the narrow dirt road was smooth this time. No sense of foreboding, no whispering wind through the trees. The forest was alive again, birds calling, leaves rustling gently, the creek nearby sparkling in the sun. It was hard to believe that only hours earlier it had felt like the edge of another world. When she reached the main road, she glanced in the rearview mirror. The cabin was already hidden by the trees, swallowed by the forest. For a moment, she felt a pang of emotion, not fear, but something bittersweet. Whatever had happened there was done. Both of them were finally free. The mountains rolled past as she drove, the morning sky painted in bright blue with streaks of white cloud. Every turn of Route 28 showed her something she hadn't noticed before: fields glistening with dew, the shimmer of Esopus Creek running parallel to the road, small houses waking to a peaceful day. In Phoenicia, she parked outside Sweet Sue's. The cafe looked exactly as it had 2 days ago. Pumpkins still on the porch, autumn leaves piled against the steps. Inside, the smell of coffee and maple syrup filled the air. Beverly spotted her before she even sat down. The older woman froze mid-step, eyes widening just slightly. "You stayed," she said quietly, setting a mug on the table. "You're all right though. I can see it." Donna gave a small, tired smile. "I am," she said. "Actually, I really am." Beverly studied her for a moment, something like understanding passing between them. No more words were needed. Some experiences were too personal to explain, too profound to put into a story others could believe. Donna finished her coffee, paid her bill, and walked out into the crisp November air. The mountains rose in the distance, calm and golden in the sunlight. She opened her car door and took one last look at the town before driving away. The past 48 hours had changed her more than 17 years of marriage ever had. The drive home gave Donna time to understand what she'd really learned. Morning sunlight spilled across the highway like forgiveness itself. The world looked freshly made as Donna drove north along Route 28, the road curving through the Catskills in their last blaze of autumn color. Crimson maples, gold birch leaves, and smoky blue ridgelines all shimmered in the clear November air. Each mile put distance between her and that cabin, but she wasn't escaping now. She was integrating something new, something that had changed her on a level she could barely name. The hum of the tires became its own meditation. With every turn, memories returned, not just of the hollow man, but of the life that had come before him. Her divorce had been its own haunting, a slow collapse of love, trust, and identity. She'd spent months believing that endings meant ruin, that when something breaks, it stays broken forever. That belief had chained her as tightly as the ghost had been chained to those woods. But Halloween night had rewritten that story. It had shown her that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to act in spite of it. That compassion isn't weakness, it's strength powerful enough to heal what rage or resistance never could. That even the dead, in their deepest torment, respond to understanding. The thought settled over her like the light mist rising from the valleys. The hollow man hadn't been evil. He'd been lost. A father crushed beneath grief so heavy that time itself couldn't move him forward. All his terror, his presence, his endless roaming, it wasn't malice. It was mourning. And in him, Donna saw a reflection she could no longer ignore. How many of us, she wondered, do the same thing? How many keep revisiting the ruins of what once was, relationships, dreams, mistakes, unwilling to step beyond them? How many become ghosts in their own lives, haunting the past because it feels safer than the unknown future? She had. For years. But the cabin had forced her to face that truth. And in offering that long-lost spirit a moment of compassion, she'd freed herself too. The realization made her chest ache in a strangely beautiful way. When she reached the outskirts of Albany, the skyline didn't feel cold or heavy anymore. The city looked alive again, people walking briskly, sunlight glinting off office windows, a world continuing as always. Only this time, she was rejoining it, not observing from the outside. At Albany Medical Center, where she worked as a nurse, familiar faces greeted her. She noticed details she'd once overlooked, the nervous smile of a patient before surgery, the tremor in a family member's hand as they waited for news. Before, she might have rushed past those moments, focused on efficiency and order. Now she slowed down. She listened. She met people's eyes. Because she knew what fear felt like when it had no words. Her colleagues noticed something different about her. A calmness. A quiet confidence that wasn't forced. When she comforted patients, her voice carried steady reassurance, the same tone she'd used that night in the cabin when she told the Hollow Man it was okay to let go. Healing, she realized, was never just about medicine. It was about presence. A few weeks later, she began volunteering at a local divorce support group. She didn't lead the sessions or tell her story from a place of authority. She sat among the others as one of them, a survivor still learning how to live again. When newcomers arrived, raw with pain, she'd listen until they ran out of words, then quietly say, "I know what it's like to feel stuck. But you don't have to stay there." Her words didn't come from theory. They came from the woods, from a night when she'd faced something ancient and terrifying, and responded with empathy instead of fear. That became her message, her anchor. Courage isn't fighting the darkness, it's seeing it, and still choosing to light a fire. Outside the group, Donna started to rebuild her life one small, human step at a time. She reconnected with old friends she'd withdrawn from after the divorce. She laughed more easily. She signed up for painting classes at the Albany Institute of History and Art, rediscovering a creativity she'd forgotten she had. Weekends found her hiking again, though never near that cabin. She preferred the gentler trails, Thatcher Park, Five Rivers, quiet paths lined with rustling leaves. Each step felt like a reclamation. Even her sister, who once teased her for isolating, noticed the difference. They met for lunch more often, reminisced, made plans. Once, her sister invited her on a cabin getaway in Vermont. Donna smiled, shook her head gently, and said, "No more cabins for a while." They both laughed, but only Donna knew how deeply she meant it. Because some places serve their purpose once. You don't go back, you carry them with you. Still, there were moments, driving home at night, hearing wind move through the trees, when she'd remember that Halloween. Not with fear, but with gratitude. The memory had shifted. It wasn't a haunting anymore. It was a lesson. Grief can bind. Compassion can release. And the line between the living and the lost isn't about death, it's about movement. About choosing to keep walking forward. As she parked her car one evening, Donna caught her reflection in the window. For the first time in a long while, she liked what she saw. Not someone running from pain, not someone trying to rebuild perfectly, but someone who'd walked through darkness and come out changed. She thought about the Hollow Man, how his final word had been thank you. She whispered it now, softly, into the fading light. Thank you. For the lesson. For the courage. For the release. Because in freeing him, she'd freed herself. And as she turned off the car and stepped into the calm November night, she felt certain of one truth. The most profound transformations aren't the ones anyone else can see, they're the ones that quietly, permanently, remake the soul. Spring sunlight poured through Donna's kitchen window, soft and golden, warming the mug between her hands. 6 months had passed since that night in the cabin, and life had settled into something calm, steady, and real. She no longer woke up expecting fear to come knocking. The silence in her home wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. She'd stopped being afraid of being alone because she finally understood solitude wasn't the same as emptiness. When she thought back to Halloween, she didn't replay the horror or the panic. She remembered the moment she chose compassion over terror, the moment she looked into the face of something inhuman and saw pain instead of evil. That single act had redrawn the lines of her entire life. She saw people differently now. The angry man at the grocery store, the impatient driver, the withdrawn patient at work, she noticed the suffering under their behavior. They weren't threats, they were people in pain, each one carrying ghosts of their own. Fear used to be her reflex. Now, curiosity and understanding came first. Challenges no longer felt like punishments. They were invitations to show courage, to stay kind, to grow. She'd come to see endings not as failures, but as doorways that forced you to keep walking. Some doors close because you've outgrown the room. That afternoon, a thick envelope arrived, forwarded from her old post office box in Phoenicia. She almost didn't open it. When she did, she found a letter from the Connecticut Historical Society and a folded newsletter tucked inside. Her breath caught when she saw the title, The Henderson Mystery, Closure at Last? It was an article about a family who had vanished in 1962 near Miller Hollow, the same woods where her cabin stood. Local records mentioned a father, 2 children, and a tragedy no one ever fully explained. The piece quoted historians who claimed that for decades afterward, the area had been associated with haunting phenomena, cold spots, voices, unexplained lights. But in the final paragraph, one line stood out. Reports of unusual occurrences in Miller Hollow appear to have ceased entirely since last November, marking what locals are calling the quietest winter in over a century. Donna's hands trembled slightly as she read it again. She didn't need anyone to explain what that meant. The haunting hadn't simply stopped, it had found peace. A soft smile crossed her face. She folded the clipping carefully, slipped it into her memory box alongside a few photos and an old house key from the cabin. Some memories didn't need to be displayed. They just needed to be honored. She sat back, letting the quiet fill the room, and thought about everything that had brought her here. The divorce, the loneliness, the night she'd nearly lost herself in fear, all of it had prepared her for that single moment when love had mattered most. It struck her that the scariest experiences often shape us into who we're meant to be. They strip away pretense and pride until only truth remains. Sometimes the worst thing that happens is just the teacher that shows up disguised as disaster. Donna realized she didn't regret any of it. Not the heartbreak, not the cabin, not even the terror. Because every step had built a kind of strength she couldn't have learned any other way. The strength to stay soft in a hard world. The courage to meet pain with kindness. She whispered softly into the stillness, as if speaking to the ghost, or perhaps to herself, "Thank you." Because the truth was simple now. The night that nearly destroyed her had become the night that defined her. Her reflection in the window no longer looked uncertain. She looked steady, anchored in a quiet knowing that wouldn't fade. She understood now that courage wasn't a grand, cinematic act. It was a choice made over and over, to respond with love where fear demanded retreat. To forgive where bitterness felt easier. To keep showing up to life no matter how many times it tried to scare you away. In freeing that tormented soul, she had freed the parts of herself that were still bound to grief. And in doing so, She'd proven something profound, that love really is strong enough to break curses, even the invisible ones we carry within us. Her story wasn't about ghosts anymore. It was about transformation. About how darkness can't stand against compassion, and how even the most haunted places can become sacred ground once forgiveness takes root. She picked up her phone and recorded a note for herself, a small voice memo she'd listen to whenever doubt returned. You are stronger than you know, braver than you believe, capable of more love than you can imagine. It was what she wished someone had told her years ago. Now, she wanted others to hear it too. Because everyone faces their own version of that cabin. Everyone meets a moment where fear feels overwhelming. But courage isn't about not being scared, it's about standing still long enough to see what fear is really hiding. Donna's story reminds us of that truth. That every struggle, every heartbreak, every sleepless night might be preparing you for a battle you don't yet see. But it's also giving you the exact strength you'll need when that moment comes. Her Halloween nightmare wasn't the end of her story. It was the doorway into a deeper life. If this story touched you, subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that inspire and transform. Tell us where you're watching from and share a moment when you found courage in your darkest hour. Your support helps us keep bringing stories that matter. Tomorrow, we have another incredible story you won't want to miss. Remember, you are stronger than you know, braver than you believe, and capable of more love than you can imagine. Because sometimes, the bravest thing you'll ever do is show kindness to what frightens you.